good evening. It is good to see you this evening. If you haven't had a good day today, I don't know that there's a better one coming along for a while. I hope you enjoyed it. We have the announcements are in the bulletin. You can see those. We will be getting to our investigation tonight, but we're going to worship the Lord a little bit before we get to that. And of course, we've got to take up an offering. That's one of the things Baptists just always do. And Saturday, we will be gathering here at 11 o'clock. Probably not going to be here for more than a couple of hours, but from 11 to 12, we're going to be tuning into what's going on in Washington. Men, women, children, anybody who wants to come. I want to keep it simple. I want to try to focus that day on fasting and prayer. And so we're not going to make a big deal about the fasting. You decide what you want to do. There's really some interesting ways that some people fast. I told you about the kind of the traditional way, fast during the daylight hours. But I heard, I think it was, so the Catholics have their 40 days, in the spring. And they're supposed to refuse to do certain things, and fasting is one of them. So one lady I heard, she was not going to eat any chocolate for that week or whatever it was. I thought I could do that fast. I wouldn't want to, but I could. But the whole thing is, whatever you do, however you go about it, that's up to you, but it's to focus your attention on what the problem is. Focus your attention on connecting with the Lord. And that's why it's connected with prayer. So there are any announcements besides these that we need to make? I do have the books, and I have the movie. If you've not seen the movie, I'll ask you about that in a little bit. You can take it and watch it. And if you've got a book and you'd like to have one, we've got those too.
People need their own lives. Pray that you'll be with Rusty Shea and his family, the loss of his mother. And last week, Dan Sunderland, the loss of his mother. Lord, we pray that you'll bless these families and help them to go through this time of sorrow. Pray that you'll be with the United States of America too, Lord. Pray that you'll continue to help us to draw closer to you and not look for man to solve our problems. Now, Lord, pray that you bless these offerings, might be used to glorify you. For your name we pray. Amen.
You help me with the microphones. We won't need them for just a minute, but just be ready to do that. And one of the things that I was talking with some people who are not able to come on Sunday night, and they have been participating through YouTube. And one of the things that they mentioned was that people begin by putting the microphone to their mouth, and then they slowly but surely let it down. So when you ask a question, please keep the microphone at your mouth. Not so we can hear so much, but so that they can hear out in the interwebs. Okay, so I've got 3 short videos that will kind of set some things up for us tonight. I want to begin, I guess, let's see the first one, and then we will talk about some things. The inception of Trinitarian thought in the Old Testament. It's really much more ingrained, as you've already probably seen, and we'll see even more tonight, than we really had any idea. And we haven't even begun to go into the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament connected with the God figures. So let's see that first video first.
Now, the next few chapters we want to tackle in our summary overview of my book, The Unseen Realm, Recovering the Supernatural Worldview of the Bible, is really subject matter that I have lectured often about. You can get full lectures of the topics we'll talk about in a moment out on YouTube. And that is really the material in chapters 16, 17, 18, and chapter 29. Now, in the book, I have the chapters numbered for a particular way for other reasons. But I'm going to group these 4 together now. 16, 17, and 18 are natural grouping. I'm going to add chapter 29, which is the rider on the clouds chapter. And you'll see how that relates to the earlier 3. So 16, 17, and 18 are titled Abraham's Word, Yahweh, Visible and Invisible, and What's in a Name. And of course, we bring on chapter 29 with rider on the clouds. Now, all of these things, all of these chapters, revolve around 2 ideas. One is the fact that the idea of God coming to humans as a man has deep Old Testament roots. And the second is that when you actually sort of know what you're looking at in the Old Testament, you not only have Yahweh, the God of Israel, you actually have 2 Yahwehs. You have 2 Yahweh figures. And one of the chapter 17 hints at it. There's Yahweh who is invisible, and then there's Yahweh who is visible. Again, Yahweh often appearing as a man in the Old Testament. Both of these figures can appear in the same scene at the same time, but they're also separable. And what this really gets at is this is where Godhead talk that we're familiar with in the New Testament, with Jesus, Trinitarianism, and all that stuff. This is actually where it begins. The Old Testament, Israelite thinking, had the concept of a Godhead in it before we ever get to the New Testament. And I want to show you that by going through these chapters again very quickly in summary fashion, but I think you'll find it very interesting. Let's just start at Deuteronomy 6:4. Now this is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Again, that's actually one of the more notorious passages in the Old Testament because there are no verbs in the original Hebrew. So it's kind of hard to know what goes with what. That's why you get 6 or 7 different translations of the Shema in various English translations. But I bring it up here because this is sort of, again, the creedal statement. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. And many Jews, again, took that. And they took that verse and they thought, well, it would be heretical for me to embrace Jesus as the Messiah because these nutty apostles are running around saying Jesus was God in the flesh. Well, how can I affirm that and worship him and not deny the Shema? So it created a dilemma for them. But then you have some Jews, like John. Okay, John was a Jew writing the Gospel of John. In John 1:18 says, no one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Now think about the wording for that. The only God, but that only God is at the Father's side? Well, I thought the Father was the only God. What's this other only God? You can't have two only gods. The wording of John is in and of itself odd and interesting, but it has deep Old Testament roots, as we'll see. But John's a Jew. And so the issue is this: how in the world could first century Jews who knew the Shema and were unwilling to worship other gods, like emperor worship in first century times, the Romans, they were willing to be put to death over this. How could those same people, many of them, turn and embrace Jesus as God in the flesh and not feel at all like they had violated the Shema? How is that possible? Well, it's possible because the Old Testament has two Yahweh thinking. Okay, and think about how Christians, how we, talk about Jesus. Well, Jesus is God, right? Well, he is God, but he isn't, because he isn't the Father, but he's still God. I mean, we have this is but isn't sort of thing going on here. But the two are of the same essence, but yet they're distinct, and one is over the other. This is exactly the way that in the Old Testament, the two Yahweh figures are described and talked about. This is where it comes from. Now, the rabbis, of course, know their Old Testament, and this was a familiar discussion in Judaism. What you probably don't realize is that at one time, Judaism taught that it was okay to have two Yahweh figures, two gods in heaven, two powers in heaven. That was permissible Jewish theology until the 2nd century AD, which, of course, not coincidentally, coincides with the advent of Christianity. And the rabbis were very familiar with this idea. They would go to passages like Genesis 19:24. Think about it. Here's what it says. Yahweh rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from Yahweh out of heaven. Well, how can Yahweh rain fire from heaven from Yahweh? Yahweh doing something from Yahweh? Again, it looked odd to them. And the rabbis would talk about these sorts of verses that, well, there seems to be kind of two figures. Well, who is the second one? And they would go to passages like Exodus 15, where Yahweh is described as a man of war, or Joshua, the captain of the Lord's host, or the angel of the Lord passages, because they knew that the angel of the Lord was sometimes referred to directly as God. He says, I am the God of Bethel in one passage. So the Jewish thinking of the day had this Godhead formulation in their mind. If you're interested in this, I would recommend not only my book, Unseen Realm, because that's what we're talking about, but I'd recommend a book called Two Powers in Heaven. Trust me. When it comes to really breaking the ice, maybe getting past an impasse with a Jewish friend who just can't see embracing Jesus without denying their faith. That's the dichotomy in their head. Two Powers in Heaven by Alan Siegel. He is a Jew. He's deceased now. He died a few years ago. But his book is the major scholarly resource written in 1977 about this topic, that Judaism used to believe in two good powers in heaven, two Yahweh figures. But more importantly for us, we want to trace this in the Old Testament, and so we're at the beginning of our journey to do that. And I think, again, you're going to be fascinated by what we look at.
So we have looked at some of what he's presented a little bit before. We saw in Daniel where both of these figures show up. And we're looking now a little bit at the Old Testament, Genesis. And he actually goes into great detail in the book, connecting up a bunch of things, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how they have the two figures show up as well. If you want to get your Bibles and look in Genesis chapter 22, Genesis chapter 22. This is the very famous passage in the Old Testament called the binding. The binding where Isaac is bound by Abraham and offered as an offering. And there are some very interesting things that he brings out in the book that are right here on the pages of the Bible. Genesis 22. So you know the story, but I want to drill down deeper beginning in verse 10. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast withheld thy son, thine only son. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, so he saw the ram caught there. So the angel of the Lord called to him out of heaven, and he says, now I know that you fear God. So he's speaking as God. The angel of the Lord is speaking as God. In one moment he's revealed as the angel of the Lord, and then he speaks, he says, now I know basically you fear me. And if you just want to write the verses down, maybe I should show them to you. Look at chapter 28. Chapter 28 and verse 12. We'll begin with verse 12. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Okay, a great Sunday school story. You know, we've got this ladder, we've got these angels. And verse 13, though, says, And behold, the Lord stood above it. Now, the important thing to note there is the invisible God was seen. Okay? Now, this is really very elementary, but yet we read right past it and we don't notice it. The invisible God is seen. Behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in the places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken unto you. And Jacob waked out of his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place. I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took stones that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon it. So I think there's some very interesting things there. One is he's just now becoming convinced that Yahweh is the God. And I would have to assume that because he believes what the others in the land believe, that there are other gods. So he's come to the conclusion now, and he sees this God. Okay? So you can't see God, right? At least you can't see the Father. But you can see the Son. In the same way that Adam walked in the garden with the Lord, well, you can't walk with an invisible figure, I guess. I guess you could, but I don't know what you'd get out of it. But he walked with Jesus Christ in the garden. So again, you get these two God figures. They are both God. And Heiser's point is, and it's very well taken, that there are more roots of it in the Old Testament. We don't just get to the New Testament and these apostles put together the Trinitarian concept. It's Old Testament. And they're putting it together even more because, and this is Heiser's point, really. When they come to Jesus revealing himself as God, these 12 disciples are not blown away. Well, they're blown away because of that, but they're not blown away in that they reject it. They have a basis for which they can already believe that there are these two God figures, and of course there is the Spirit of God in the Old Testament. So it's really just forming, solidifying, becoming concrete in their thinking about what was in the Old Testament. It's visualized now. Okay, so do you have any questions? No questions? We'll look over at Genesis 48 then. This is another passage that he connects up in the book. Chapter 48 and verse 16. So Joseph is blessing his sons. Joseph is old. He's near dying, and he's going to pronounce a blessing upon these two sons. And he gets these hands crossed. And they think he's made a mistake, and they try to correct him, and no, he knows exactly what he's doing. But what gets kind of lost in the story is in verse 16, Joseph's blessings, his words are, he says, "The angel which redeemed me." Okay, that's a little too obvious, isn't it? You missed it. The angel that redeemed me. Angels can't redeem you. The traditional idea of what we think of as angels can't redeem you. This is the angel of the Lord that he's speaking of. Jesus, you could insert that there. Jesus, which redeemed me from all evil. Okay, so I say it's right there in plain sight, and yet we miss it. The angel who redeemed me. Okay, still no questions? Or thoughts? Okay, well, let's see the second video then, second clip, on the angel and Yahweh.
Now, I want to take a look at a few passages, again, where the angel of God, the angel of the Lord, is identified with and as the God of Israel. And again, this is the backdrop. This is the Old Testament backdrop for not only Judaism's two powers idea that used to be okay until it was declared a heresy in the 2nd century AD, but it's also the backdrop for the New Testament, for high Christology, for a Godhead. Now, we're only talking about two right now. You get the third person, the Holy Spirit, brought into the picture in the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament is going to take the Spirit and apply some of this language to the Spirit. So Trinitarianism actually begins in the Old Testament. But we're going to focus on two here, specifically the angel, again, just to make the point. Then we're going to move on to some other things. But in Genesis 31, this is, again, one of the stories about Jacob. And he's visited by the angel of God. Then the angel of God said to me, again, Genesis 31, right around verse 10, said to me in a dream, "Jacob." And I said, here I am. So then they have a conversation. And the angel actually says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, get up from this land, and return to the land of your kindred, so on and so forth. If you know anything about the Jacob story, that's a significant statement, because Bethel was the first place where Jacob encountered the God of Israel. And here you have the angel saying, that was me. I am the God of Bethel, the one that you build an altar to, the one that you encountered there at Bethel. Genesis 48, though, is probably my favorite example of how God, how Yahweh and the angel are sort of fused together conceptually. This is, again, a familiar story. Oftentimes in Sunday school, this is one we'll teach kids. Again, we'll try to convey the meaning of it. But this is Jacob's blessing of Joseph's children, and of course, blessing Joseph through his children. And we usually teach the passage about, he crosses his hands because, he wants to, put one blessing on the second-born as opposed to the firstborn and all that. But we get lost in that detail. What we miss is what Jacob actually says. So Israel, Jacob, again, this is Genesis 48, 14 through 16, stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, thus crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, saying, now catch this, there's going to be 3 stanzas to what Jacob says. First stanza, Jacob says, the God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. God, Elohim, specifically Ha Elohim there. So the God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. The God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day. And here's the third part. The angel who has redeemed me from all harm. May he bless these boys. May he bless these lads. Now, did you catch that? You have, may God do this, may the God who did this, well, who does he want to bless the boys? Is it God or the angel? The answer is yes. Because in Hebrew, may he bless these lads. The verb is actually singular. It's not plural. In other words, you wouldn't translate it, and the biblical writer didn't write it to say, may they bless these lads. No. He doesn't care about distinguishing God from the angel, because there's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It's the same person. Just you have 2 Yahwehs going on, 2 Yahweh figures. So may the God who did this, may the God who did that, may the angel who did this other thing, may he bless these boys. Again, it is a tight statement, even from to the level of Hebrew grammar, that God, the God of Israel, and the angel can be identified with each other.
Okay, so as I mentioned, he goes into great detail in the book connecting, and he's a researcher. He goes into great, this book is really a research book. It's not that you sit down and read the book, more of a, like the encyclopedia. And so he connects Abraham and the experience that Abraham had with these 2 figures, and Isaac and Jacob, and right on through Joseph, we just looked. And these 2 figures are just all over the place. And frankly, now I've read these verses so many times, and yet I didn't pay attention to it either. So, no other questions? No questions. So this is an overview of the same thing that we have dealt with, as I said, in Daniel and other places. It's astounding how much it's all over the Old Testament, these 2 figures. Okay. We're going to jump to a little bit different part of the book where he deals with the gods of Egypt. And before we look at that video, I want to read you, if I could have my presentation. don't usually read you a lot, but I wanted you to see this in his own words. So if you've got the book, you can read the chapter on Yahweh and the gods of Egypt. So I hope you can see that well enough to follow along. Gentiles back in Canaan heard about what Yahweh had done. In Midian, remember Midian is where Jethro lives. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, this is where he ran off into the desert after he committed murder and was in exile. Went to his father-in-law. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, put the impact in no uncertain terms. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the gods, even in the matter where they, the Egyptians, dealt arrogantly against the Israelites. Yahweh's reputation among the nations was linked to Israel's exodus and transplantation in the land. We know this because of the things that were said as they went to the promised land, that their reputation had preceded them about what God had done to the gods of Egypt. This backdrop is why the Exodus event is repeatedly cast as a conflict between Yahweh and the gods. Pharaoh, as we know, was unresponsive to the command of God through Moses to let his people go. In Exodus 5:2, Pharaoh had sarcastically asked Moses, "Who is Yahweh that I should listen to his voice to release Israel?" His answer came in a series of horrible plagues. The Bible tells us the plagues were aimed at Egypt's gods. The Elohim, who had been given their authority by Yahweh and who were supposed to govern Egypt on his behalf. The idea is not that each plague neatly corresponds to any Egyptian deity, although I think there's a way to do that, only that the powerful acts of Yahweh went beyond the powers of the gods of Egypt and their divine representative son, Pharaoh. Now listen carefully. This is the heart of what I wanted you to get. So we're getting this set up between the gods and God. Egyptian theology linked Pharaoh and Egypt's pantheon. From the 4th dynasty onward in Egypt, Pharaoh was considered the son of the high god Ra. He was, to borrow a biblical expression, Ra's image on earth, the maintainer of the cosmic order established by Ra and his pantheon at the creation. Pharaoh and his son Ra was the son of Ra. Israel was explicitly called the son of Yahweh in the confrontation with Pharaoh in Exodus 4:23 and following. Yahweh and his son, Yahweh, Israel, his son, would defeat the high god of Egypt and his son. God against God, son against son, imager against imager. In that context, the plagues are spiritual warfare. Yahweh will undo the cosmic order, throwing the land into chaos. The final plague, in particular, the death of the firstborn, was aimed at Egypt's gods. God told Moses, "And I will go through the land of Egypt during this night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from human to animal, and I will do punishments among all the gods of Egypt. I am Yahweh." So Heiser does a really good job in the book of bringing out this conflict that's almost a superimposition. The false gods of the earth, Ra and his son, and Yahweh and Israel, which is his son, that's named in the passage. So I just thought that was an interesting juxtaposition of those two things that are, they're no accident about that. So any thoughts before we look at the video clip about that? No? Well, then as soon as we get that pulled up, we'll look at that third clip about the gods of Egypt.
Let's talk first about the Exodus and the gods of Egypt. Now, what I want to do in this case and with some of the other subjects, again, in this brief summary of these chapters, is just take some episodes, some passages that I think for the most part will be familiar to you, but see how they can be read, and they really should be read, against the backdrop of divine counsel worldview, Deuteronomy 32 worldview, all that sort of stuff, how that informs our reading of certain passages. So in Exodus 5, we know that when Moses is sent to Pharaoh by God after the burning bush episode, and he has his confrontation with Pharaoh about letting Israel go, Pharaoh says, "Who is Yahweh, that I should listen to his voice to release Israel?" That's Exodus 5:2. And of course the answer was the plagues. Well, let me just show you who Yahweh is. The plagues are aimed not just at the people of Egypt, and not just to, again, inflict bodily harm and misery. They are aimed at Israel's gods. And we know this from the text. Exodus 12, around 11 and 12, and Numbers 33, verse 4. I mean, basically have the same thought. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. This is what the plagues are. So the plagues are actually an example of God retaliating against the treatment by foreign gods allotted to Egypt back at Babel, back at Deuteronomy 32, because of the way they treat his people. This is spiritual warfare, and we sort of already know that, but think about the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Okay, when the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. Of course, those gods become corrupt. They become enemies. They become hostile to Yahweh and to his own inheritance, his own allotted heritage. Deuteronomy 32:9. And God says, I've had enough of this. Okay. This night, I will have victory over the gods of Egypt. Again, at the Passover. And of course, these other two references about, I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. So the Deuteronomy 32 worldview sort of gives us another little layer to it. But I would also suggest we need to think about the divine counsel worldview. How hollow is this statement? That on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. How hollow, how pointless, how meaningless is the statement if the biblical writer really thought that the gods of Egypt were not real? Okay, we know from biblical theology that they were real, they are real, okay, that these are divine beings that are under judgment, yes. Psalm 82, again, talks about the judgment of the gods, even the death of the gods, Yahweh's enemies. It puts it at the eschaton in the day of the Lord, which is yet future. But as it stands right now, this is the biblical worldview. And we're going to talk about how it relates to today as we proceed in other parts of the book. But for now, here in the Old Testament, if you don't embrace the notion that the biblical writers believed that these gods were real and that this is biblical theology, statements like this concerning the Exodus and the gods of Egypt are utterly meaningless. They're lies. They're untruths. So we need to really, again, think about what it is that's going through our mind when it comes to our perception, our belief system, with respect to the supernatural worldview of the Bible.
So the common theme running through the whole thing is the point is there's an unseen realm and it's real. There have been two lines of thinking all the way back to my Bible college days about what commentators said about the plagues in Egypt and how God dealt with that. So you remember that the magicians of Pharaoh were able to reproduce some of the things that Moses did. The water turned to blood and different things. But they were not able to do all of them. Well, so the two lines of thinking were, first of all, it was just magic. Right? They're magicians. You get to studying that word, and that's kind of funny, actually. But that's what a lot of preachers preach, and a lot of theologians believe. They were just magicians, and they were just tricking people. And the other line of thinking is, and this one's much more biblical and much more in line with what Heiser has brought out, is the whole point is they were able to do some of the things because they had supernatural power. But God finally trumped it and showed that His power was greater than their power. I think that's the simple truth of it. These magicians, these followers of these demon gods, were able to supernaturally do some things, but there came a point when God stopped that, and He showed that He had the power. So Moses' father-in-law became convinced that God was the God among the gods, Elohim. It's easier for us to swallow that these are demons than for us to call them gods. There's something that just makes us act viscerally against that, doesn't it? It's just kind of hard for us to swallow small g versus the big G, I guess would be one way to think about it. So these people, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, became convinced that Yahweh was the God. The dwellers in Canaan had heard about all this stuff, and they had become convinced that Yahweh was the big dog among all the gods. So we dismiss that, generally, thinking, well, they were just foolish Old Testament people who didn't know any better. They thought these were, they were just idols. They were dead, not real. But what Heiser's brought out with his research is these Old Testament people believed that. The New Testament as well believed that the unseen realm was real. Now, if that's true, if the unseen realm is true, and there are demon gods who have been given districts, areas of the world, I mean, it explains so many things. For one thing, if you go to Israel, all of the disputed land, I've told you this before, all of the disputed lands, Gaza Strip, all of that, are those places where there were the giants that they had to go in. And and a lot of people struggle with this, where God told Israel, kill or drive out. Where He wanted them to kill was the giants. Drive out were all those who were not the Nephilim. So that makes it a whole lot more sensible. He didn't want to just kill people, but He wanted to get rid of the existential threat against Israel. And ultimately, are those demon gods still around in the world today? As far as I know. And like I said this morning, whispering in Putin's ear is the unseen realm. And it explains so much of what's going on. I just laugh at what Trump has done. We talked about this on Wednesday. It's almost funny how he has played them. You know, and people say Trump's not very smart. He's a genius. I mean, I have come to the conclusion he is a genius. Sometimes I wish he'd tweet a little less and just shut up. But he is a genius. He was able to separate out Iran. First thing he did when he got into office, he got out of that deal. Next thing, he separated out the Palestinians by saying, I'll give you this. They said no, which is exactly what he wanted them to say. And now the other Islamic nations are beginning to fall in line. I mean, it's like a puppet master. Actually, it's not Trump, is it? There's an unseen realm, and there is a warfare that's going on to this day. And God's going to win. So, you have any questions? Anything that's come up in your mind? You're kind of quiet tonight. Okay. If you would like a book, see me. If you want the video, I have that. You can see it. I guess we're at the conclusion. Don't want to forget to pray for, we have 2 more with COVID. That makes 5 in our church, which is kind of a high number for our church. But nobody here at church. Got it from somebody here at church. which is a real blessing. And so Zeta and Dwayne are struggling with that. As far as I know, they're fine. But we will continue to pray for them. Very often that second week is where things can go bad, so we want to really pray for them. But generally speaking, from a statistical standpoint, COVID is not turning out to be any worse than the flu. Of course, you know what the problem with the statistic is. You don't know whether you are one or not. Let's sing our closing song.